They had no business being here. A Class 13 death world. A place where gravity crushed metal, where the air corroded lungs, where even the water was laced with microscopic horrors that could strip flesh from bone. The Galactic Union had declared it uninhabitable centuries ago, a place fit only for exile or madness. And yet here they were. The Zalari research vessel Volan's Grace hovered in low orbit, its crew of scientists and surveyors scanning the barren, storm-racked surface below. The mission was simple: gather data, confirm the Union's assessment, and leave before the planet's electromagnetic storms rendered their systems useless. But then, the alarms screamed. A fluctuation. An energy surge from below, impossibly strong for a world classified as dead. Before anyone could react, the ship shuddered, warning lights flaring as a sudden burst of interference slammed into their systems. Thrusters misfired. Guidance protocols failed. The pull of the death world took hold. They fell. The impact was worse than anticipated. Metal screamed against rock as their ship skidded across jagged terrain, coming to a violent stop in a toxic valley. The world outside was a nightmare of shifting storms, hostile terrain, and unseen threats lurking in the shadows. Their reinforced hull had barely held. Survivors scrambled to assess the damage. Atmosphere filtration failing. Communications down. Power reserves hemorrhaging. A distress signal, unreliable at best, was sent, but the thick, charged air swallowed transmissions whole. Professor Drelk, the mission's lead scientist, struggled to steady his breathing. His species was not made for this, a frail, slender form designed for laboratories and council chambers, not hellscapes like this. The rest of his team, 3 others, fared no better. Their exosuits strained against the atmosphere's corrosive effects, and every breath was a fight. The valley was eerily silent. Too silent. Then the shadows moved. A low growl rippled through the air, vibrating in their chests. Something massive prowled just beyond the wreckage, shifting through the toxic mist. Drelk's mandibles clicked in fear. Their scanners had identified no life forms large enough to pose a threat, but the readings had been incomplete. And now, something was here. The creature emerged, 6 limbs, armored hide, eyes like burning coals. A predator built for murder, watching them with a cold, hungry patience. It did not lunge. It did not need to. They were weak. It knew they would fall. Drelk fumbled for his emergency beacon, though he knew it was useless. They had no weapons, no way to fight. The beast stepped forward. A crack split the air. The creature recoiled as something struck its head, another impact, then another. A sharp retort echoed through the valley. A sound Drelk had never heard before but instinctively understood. Gunfire. The beast let out a guttural snarl before retreating into the mist. The air hung still for a breath, then heavy boots crunched against the ground. Humanoids. Armored, weathered, carrying weapons that hissed faint trails of heat. Not creatures. Not ghosts. Humans. The tallest among them lowered his rifle. His face was scarred, his eyes calculating. He regarded the wreckage, the aliens, the broken remains of their ship. And then he sighed, shaking his head. Well, he muttered, voice tinged with something between amusement and pity. You sure picked the wrong planet to crash on. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, checking the wreckage, ensuring the aliens weren't injured beyond help. Their presence alone defied all logic. Class 13 death worlds were not just inhospitable, they were supposed to be impossible to colonize. Yet these people stood here, unbothered by the atmosphere that made every breath a struggle for the Zalari. Drelk's mind raced as they were led away from the crash site. The terrain was brutal, jagged, uneven, the air thick with chemicals that corroded their filtration units with every passing minute. Yet the humans walked through it like it was a minor inconvenience, barely even acknowledging the conditions that should have made life unbearable. Then, against all odds, they reached the settlement. It was no temporary shelter, no makeshift survival camp. It was a colony, built into the rock, reinforced against the elements, surrounded by barriers repurposed from wreckage and native stone. Light flickered from enclosed buildings, energy sources humming despite the storms. Drelk's disbelief deepened. Humanity hadn't just survived here. They had dug in. Inside, the air was more stable, less caustic. Alien technology was everywhere, some of it clearly salvaged from wrecked ships, others improvised with a level of ingenuity that should have been impossible given the environment. Tools, weapons, even crude generators, all of it working despite the planet's hostility. And then there were the creatures. At first, Drelk thought the humans had domesticated some local fauna for utility, beasts with thick hides and rows of jagged teeth lying lazily near their owners. But as one of the aliens stumbled in exhaustion, one of the creatures let out a deep, almost concerned chuff before nudging them upright. It wasn't a work beast. It was a pet. A predator, domesticated. Drelk's mind reeled. Every species in the Galactic Union understood the law of nature. Apex predators did not integrate. They dominated, killed, and consumed. To tame one was madness. And yet here these humans were, taming a Deathworld itself. One of the humans, a grizzled man who introduced himself as Rourke, watched their reactions with something resembling amusement. He sat casually, a drink in his hand, looking at them like fragile children lost in the dark. "You're wondering how we're still here," he said. "How we're not dead." Drelk couldn't even form the words. Rourke leaned back, taking a sip of something that smelled toxic. "We didn't mean to stay, if that's what you're thinking. Colony ship came down decades ago, malfunction, bad crash. We lost contact with the Union, and they figured we were dead." Drelk felt a cold chill settle over him. The Galactic Union had known humans were here. They had simply written them off. "We tried to leave. A few times. Built ships, sent distress signals." Rourke smirked. "But something funny happened. We got good at surviving. Real good. And after a while, we realized." He gestured around the settlement, at the fortified walls, at the people laughing, drinking, living. "This place? It's home now." Drelk could hardly process the words. The air, the wildlife, the constant danger, this was home? The scientist in him wanted to reject it outright, but the evidence was overwhelming. These weren't desperate castaways. They weren't holding on by a thread. They had chosen to stay. And that, more than anything, terrified him. The more time they spent in the human settlement, the more the fear turned into something else: unease, admiration, and an unsettling realization that nothing about these creatures made sense. The first lesson came quickly. Food. The aliens had barely managed to stomach the emergency rations salvaged from the wreck, but the humans? They ate everything. The planet's flora, its fauna, things that should have been toxic. Drelk had witnessed one casually bite into a fruit that had enough natural acidity to corrode weaker metals, and they had only winced before finishing it off with a grin. "This place toughens you up," Rourke had said. "Or it kills you. Either way, it sorts itself out." Then there was the wildlife. The predators were a constant threat, but the humans hunted them, not out of desperation, not as a last resort, but because it was normal to them. More than once, Drelk had watched them drag back some massive, six-legged beast, chatting casually as if it were no more difficult than a morning chore. The idea of turning a Deathworld's apex killers into food was beyond insanity. And it wasn't just survival skills that defied reason, it was their sheer resilience. One of the younger humans, a woman named Kala, had been injured while out on patrol. A deep gash along her arm, enough to warrant medical attention. Drelk had expected a full emergency response, but instead, she had gritted her teeth, let another human stitch her up with crude tools, and carried on like it was an inconvenience rather than a life-threatening wound. Their pain tolerance, their ability to endure, was inhuman. The biggest shock came when they finally saw what the humans had built beneath the surface. Not just homes. Not just shelter. A functioning society. They had infrastructure. Power, crude but effective. Water filtration systems that worked in conditions that should have been impossible. They had records, planning logs, **history, **a civilization forming in the depths of what should have been a graveyard. Drelk felt his worldview cracking. The Galactic Union feared Class 13 death worlds because they were not meant to be survived. They were natural deterrents, barriers against expansion, realms of chaos where logic and order broke down. No species could endure them. But humans had not only endured, they had thrived. More than that, they had adapted. They had turned death into something livable. Not by avoiding the dangers but by conquering them. Druk's fears shifted into something far more dangerous. Understanding. It should have been impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans weren't just surviving a Class 13 death world. They had mastered it. Druk had spent his life cataloging the limits of sentient life, the thresholds at which a species could no longer function. Humans had shattered every expectation, every fundamental rule of survival. They weren't just immune to hardship. They embraced it. The research team's original plan had been simple: send a distress signal, wait for rescue, and leave this nightmare behind. But that was before they understood what they were looking at. Now, the idea of reporting back to the Galactic Union felt dangerous. The humans were an anomaly. A species that shouldn't exist in its current form. Their biology, their adaptability, their sheer refusal to break under conditions that would obliterate most civilizations, it made them something else entirely. Druk had seen them drink water that should have been lethal, wrestle with creatures that could snap bones with a twitch, and laugh in the face of storms that would ground entire fleets. They were built for this. But what was truly unsettling was that they hadn't just conquered the planet. They had chosen to stay. Any other species would have fought to escape, clawed for a way back to safety. The humans had done the opposite. They had looked at the most inhospitable place in the known galaxy and said, "This is ours now." And if they could do that here, on a world that the Union had deemed unlivable, what else were they capable of? The distress signal had been sent days ago, but now, for the first time, Druk was afraid of what would happen when rescue arrived. Because the moment the rest of the galaxy learned what humans could do, nothing would ever be the same.